activity, Chris stated his only exercise came from his daily walks around the neighborhood, which were enough for him to work up a sweat. Solid Chris didn't seem to see a problem with his lifestyle, but Casey became determined to get him to eat better and exercise more. She offered to take Chris jogging, an idea which he was initially hesitant about since he was worried his chest would bounce around too much. However, once Casey suggested he could wear a sports bra, he rapidly warmed up to the idea. He quickly purchased a piece of the female apparel, sent Casey a photo of himself wearing it, and commented on how confident it made him feel. Casey also encouraged Chris to get out of the house more. He began attending what he described as a relationship development class, which he hoped would help build up his confidence about talking to women in person. He compared it to his idea of dating education class, a concept he had been trying to get schools to implement for years alongside sex ed. Chris also applied for a job at Target. Going through with this took a lot more convincing from Casey than she first thought, as Chris was concerned that getting a job would impact his monthly social security checks. He never received a call back, but it cannot be overstated how much of a big step it was for Chris to apply in the first place, considering he had been arrested at Target only a few years prior. In October, after months away from the internet, Liquid Chris returned with a new video. He claimed that he had not made it to his job in Redmond, Washington, as while riding the bus there, he had been drugged and kidnapped by Solid Chris. He then stated that he woke up in the Sahara Desert with blood oozing from his anus. Chris was quick to deny the story.
I mean, come on, his story. I mean, being put in a meat factory, Sahara Desert, Aladdin people? Huh. And also, he could easily taken the drugs himself.
Upon his return, Liquid immediately reignited the feud, claiming that Casey had begun to fall in love with Solid Chris during his time away. But as soon as Liquid returned, she immediately fell back in love with the winner of the contest. This worked incredibly well in riling up the potential Target employee. He soon publicly stated his love for Casey, and the battle for her affection was on. Like their previous battle, this was really nothing more than the two of them making videos back and forth. On October 29th, Christian uploaded a diss track against Liquid, sung over the song Walk This Way. By the end, it simply devolved into Chris flipping through his playlist and using each new song to insult Liquid. It was here that Chris claimed Casey was now dating him, which was not true at all. Liquid was quick to respond with his own diss track, rapping to the beat of Eminem's My Name Is. As Solid vs. Liquid round 2 progressed, Casey and the Miscreants devised a way to up the ante, when on November 4th she called Chris and said she wanted him to meet her parents. This was when Casey handed her phone off to a fellow prankster posing as her father, Matthew. It was almost immediately apparent that the point of this chat was to make Christian as uncomfortable as possible. Every time he revealed a new detail about his life, Matthew would grill him on it and express his disapproval. After enduring this for nearly an hour, Chris told Matthew that he had crossed a line. This did not go over well, and the call ended with both Casey and her father being upset. The saga came to a head on November 10th when Chris and Casey had their final phone call. Christian remained largely silent as she grilled him about his behavior towards her father, and how he had seemed to take no significant steps in improving his lifestyle. She informed Chris that she and Liquid would be getting married soon, and that she no longer wanted to be his friend. Later that day, Chris posted a tear-filled video giving Casey and Liquid his blessing.
Congratulations on your wedding. I wish you and Chris all happiness in the world.
The supposed reason for Chris Chan making this video was to share the other things he wanted to tell Casey before she hung up on him. It seemed like this ordeal had once again left Chris emotionally destroyed. But as Casey even predicted, it wouldn't be long until he had forgotten about all of this and moved on to his next big saga.
Captain's Log, Stardate, November 12th, 2009. It's now time for fan mail. Well, not much fan mail, as it is a little something from the Virginia Library of Congress.
Only a couple days after Liquid Chris had ended his storyline, our protagonist uploaded a new video in which his moods seemed to have done a complete 180. Christian happily displayed a letter showing he had officially registered the name Sonichu with the Virginia Library of Congress. From the very beginning, people had mocked the idea of Sonichu, saying there was no way Chris would be allowed to make money off of the characters without being sued by both Nintendo and Sega. Chris had always refuted this though, saying that Sonichu was different enough from the pre-existing properties that it could stand on its own. He seemed to believe that this registration completely validated him, but it's important to note that it was far from a copyright. On November 23rd, Chris noticed some new advertisements that were being showcased on Wikipedia. One depicted Peter Griffin from Family Guy supporting gay rights, and the other showed a Pickle Man mascot promoting a contest for a free trip to Mexico. Chris was irate that these messages were being displayed on his website, and emailed the system's operator, CogsDev, to get them taken down. In response, the admin told him that there was nothing to be done, as the ad space had been purchased legally by Chris's old enemy, Jack Thaddeus. This opened a brand new door for trolls as they found yet another way to drive their target insane. Shortly thereafter, Chris uploaded a video asking his fans for donations in order to remove the ads. Strangely, he chose to single out his European fans, as it seemed he had recently developed a fascination with Europe and its currency. He also expressed his interest in finding official sponsors for the website, with his eyes set on Coca-Cola. As the months continued, Chris's fury at these gay pride ads only grew stronger. In one video, he even claimed that he taped pieces of paper to his computer screen so he didn't have to see them whenever he logged on to the site. By the end of the year, he had reached his limits, editing Wikipedia himself, removing Jack's ads, and replacing them with fake advertisements for Coke and the James Cameron film Avatar. These were quickly taken down, and Chris was informed by CogsDev that they had received a cease and desist order from Coca-Cola, although this was most likely a lie. After this incident, Chris's administrative privileges were revoked. Also around this general time period, Chris began doing a daily mailbag on the Wikipedia. Basically, this was his opportunity to respond to fan emails, speaking with them directly and answering their questions. He would usually give short responses, rarely more than a single sentence, and many wondered if he actually cared at all about it or if it was just simply something CogsDev talked him into. The most interesting bit of information from these, though, was the revelation that Christian had a bizarre and irrational hatred of people with Asperger's syndrome. He seemed to believe that their struggles were nothing compared to those of people with autism, and he despised the fact that the two were often lumped together. This is when an artist by the name of Alec Benson Leary created a comic called Asperchu, taking advantage not only of Chris's hatred of Asperger's, but also his insistence that he own the copyright to Sonichu. This comic was clearly a parody of Chris in his life, with the Asperchu character even looking like Christian. These illustrations in the publication also included a human character that too had an uncanny resemblance to Chris Chan, named Ian Brandon Anderson. Upon discovering Asperchu, Chris became enraged. Alec began emailing him apologetically, trying to smooth things out between the two of them. In these emails, Alec included art of Asperchu and Sonichu together, which only angered Chris further, as he believed they were trying to portray the two as being in a homosexual relationship.
You have done wrong with this drawing. It only depicts the opposite of straight, you DA. There may be a human character coming into the books with Asperger's, but there will certainly never be a Sonichu or Roastchu with that ailment.
Later in December, Chris received an email from a young man named Evan claiming that Chris had stolen his character and used it in his comic without permission. Evan was actually the first person to ever send Chris Sonichu fan art all the way back in 2008. Among these drawings was one of Evan's original Sonichu character, a hedgehog with drills for hands named Simon Chew. A short time later, Chris had introduced his own character with drills for hands named Simon Law. The resemblance between the two was undeniable, and it was obvious to any passive observer way through the year, and that Chris would just have to live with it. This only served to anger him further, as he made another video a few days later threatening to ruin Alec before punching the camera.
I'm gonna ruin you, Larry. Angry.
The longer Alec's ads stayed up on the Wikipedia, the angrier Chris became. On January 15th, he posted another video directed at not just Alec, but a few of his friends as well. These included Asperpedia's webmaster Mao Ling, Sean August Watley, a frequent Asperpedia contributor, and Evan. Together, these men would later be known as the Asperpedia 4. The upload concludes with Chris challenging all of them to a fight to decide once and for all who was superior. He even read out his home address yet again so they could come face him directly. As January continued, Chris posted more and more uploads about his hatred for Alec and the Asperpedia 4. In fact, mere hours later, he made a rant in which he spoke a Spanish phrase backwards that he believed translated to "love Sonic Chew and hate Asper Chew." Confused, trolls were able to trace this back to an episode of The Simpsons, where a similar backwards speaking tactic is used to try to brainwash people to join the Navy. On the 17th, Chris uploaded yet another video about his feelings toward Alec. In this one, he reviewed the Asper Chew comic, detailing every single thing he hated about it. Of course, the main thing he took offense to was how it depicted him, specifically citing the fact that Asper Chew had a quote-unquote Buddha belly. He went on to criticize its anti-religious themes, as well as the excessive violence and nudity. To that last point, Chris did address the fact that Sonic Chew had seen its fair share of nudity as well. However, he had defended it by stating it had all been censored, seemingly ignoring the fact that he had originally posted it all uncensored. The irate man concluded this video by claiming he would be getting the FBI involved in the case, and telling Alec that the spirit of his dog Patty would haunt his nightmares and eat his soul. After this, Chris and Alec finally began communicating with each other directly over the phone. Their first conversation began on the subject of the promotions placed on the Wikipedia. Surprisingly, Chris seemed ready to compromise on this matter, saying he wouldn't mind so much if the ads were regulated only to the site's sidebars. In addition, he also said that he should be able to run his own ads on Asperpedia just to make things fair. To both of these points, Alex seemed to be willing to cooperate, although it appears nothing much came of it. These discussions next moved on to the subject of Alex's use of Sonic Chew characters in his comic. Chris demanded he stop, or at least change their names, but Alex stood his ground. For some reason, the topic was shifted to Alec and Chris pointing out the various lore differences between the two universes, such as the fact that in his world, Sonic Chew was a Pokemon, while in Alec's, he was just a species of animal. This led the troll to his next argument. If Chris insisted that Sonic Chew was a Pokemon, how could he then claim to own the full copyright to him? Chris obviously had no answer to this question, as he uncomfortably tried to shift the topic back to the original subject of the ads, but Alec continued pressing, and eventually Chris made up a lie about his cell phone running out of battery, ending the discussion. Their next call would take place around a week later. Chris expressed his displeasure with the name Asper Chew, on the grounds that it was mean towards the character. He seemed to be arguing from the perspective that Asper Chew had the same feelings as a real person, citing the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit to bolster his point. When Alec tried to make Chris see that there was a difference between the thoughts and feelings of real people and fictional characters, Chris simply called him naive. Realizing that this conversation was going nowhere, Alec shifted the topic to Chris's continued use of Simon Law in his comic despite Evan's objections. Chris dug his heels in, insisting that Simon Law had not been inspired in any way by Simon Chu. Alec pointed out by Chris's own logic that there was a possibility Asper Chu was not based on Sonic Chu. On top of that, he also read off of Chris's official Wikipedia page about Simon Law, where he directly credited Simon Chu as being the basis for the character. Chris was once again backed into a corner, and he was forced to say he would consider writing Simon Law out of his comic. As these regular phone calls continued, Alec began asking Chris to publicly apologize for the things he had said about the Asperpedia 4. He eventually relented to this point, but Alec was not happy with the apology he made, as he spent most of the video expressing his continued frustration with the ads on the website. It seemed to him that Chris Chan was not actually sincerely sorry, and was only apologizing in the hopes that it would make Alec remove his advertisements. The second apology was equally poor. He was at least able to name the things he was sorry for, specifically the threats he made against Alec and his theft of Evan's Simon Chu character. He carefully worded it as to not technically give up the rights to Simon Law, only Simon Chu. As if this weren't enough, just a few hours earlier, Chris had made a video cursing and threatening Mao over new pro-gay ads that were appearing on the Wikipedia. Eventually, Alex stopped asking Chris for more apology videos, as it became increasingly clear that he would never learn his lesson. The way the man spoke to Chris was like a parent disciplining a child. Unlike many of the other trolls who just wanted to see a reaction, it seemed like Alec had a genuine desire to make Chris see the error of his ways. But as you would soon discover, this strategy didn't work. February 25th, 2010 was a big day in Chris Chan history, as it marked the publication of Sonic Chu number 10. Which would prove to be one of the most bombastic comics he had ever made, because it attempted to exact revenge on practically every troll who had ever wronged him over the past year. The story opens with Chris being released from the time void he had been trapped in several issues prior. He detailed what had transpired while he was away, how he had traveled to the future and met his wife, a woman named Lovely Weather. She was a scientist working on a vaccine for homosexuality, which she was finally able to complete using a sample of Chris's pure straight blood. Chris then traveled back to the present and used the vaccine on his nemesis Nate Zirk, turning him heterosexual again and as a result redeeming his character. Later in the issue, Chris stated that he meant no offense to his homosexual fans, and that he only included this plot point in order to convince his trolls that he wasn't gay. It didn't work. Next, he grabbed his trusty Guitar Hero controller, which transformed him from a drawing to a photograph of himself. Chris and his band, the Hedgehog Boys, played his original song, Revive Zordon, a Power Rangers parody of Cat Scratch Fever by Ted Nugent. The tune was played so loud that it caused the 4-cent garbage building to crumble. As everything collapsed around them, Clyde Cash and Jack Thaddeus grabbed one another by the hand and fell to their deaths. In Chris's mind, this was meant to humiliate them, implying that they were gay just before killing them off. To his dismay though, most readers thought this came off as a surprisingly touching and tragic end to the two characters. Once the tower came down, Chris lamented the fact that the trolls forced him to do such a thing, and added the detail that there were 1,500 people inside the 4-cent garbage headquarters when it was destroyed. The final part of the story came when Chris traveled to the home of Alec Benson Leary and wiped all of the contents of Asperpedia from the internet. Despite the fact that this issue was all about him getting back at the trolls, he did use this section to somewhat honor the wishes of Alec and Evan by killing off Simon Law. Yet he did this in his own spiteful way, depicting Evan as the one to kill her by planting an exploding Pokemon in her bathroom. Following the lengthy courtroom scene, the entire Asperpedia 4 were found guilty of Simon Law's murder and sentenced to death. Each of them received a different grisly fate. Alec was put in an electric chair, with 10 of Chris's characters simultaneously pushing the button to end his life. Evan was chained to a wall and sliced to pieces by Simon Law's husband and her recently born daughter, Sandy. Sean was also chained to a wall and shot multiple times, leaving his body bloody and riddled with bullets. Finally, Chris personally used his psychic powers to mutilate and butcher Mao. Upon reading this, Alec called the comic book creator once again, this time to talk about his shock at how he and his friends were depicted in Sonic 10. He asked Chris if he understood the hypocrisy of showing such gratuitous violence in his comic character of Sandy, who was basically just a new version of Evan's creation. Chris, of course, disagreed, and this arguing ultimately went nowhere. This would be their final phone call.
Are you positive you really understand how I feel about you, Mr. Hans Asperger? Yeah. Yeah? Baka! I feel dislike towards you for selfishly putting your ill name in association with autism.
At the same time he was dealing with the Asperpedia 4, Chris had also begun attending a young adult social club in hopes of meeting new people, and drumming up more interest in Sonic Chew. It was here that he met a young woman who he referred to as the Wallflower in order to respect her wishes of remaining anonymous on the internet. The two of them seemed to hit it off quite well at first, although she was quick to inform Christian that she was not looking for a relationship, and only wanted to be friends. Chris, being Chris, however, still thought it would be a good idea to escalate things. The now 28-year-old man and the Wallflower emailed back and forth frequently over the coming months, and eventually decided to start collaborating on a fantasy story together. During this correspondence, Chris continued to try to get closer with her. This only served to make the young woman more uncomfortable though, as she requested Chris limit the visits he had apparently been making to her home.
I don't want to sound mean or anything, but I would like some space between visits. I like you and you're nice, but I only just met you. I am in no mood for an actual relationship. And during the once a month thing, I want to visit with the other young adults too.
On March 9th, Chris posted a custom level he had been making on the game Little Big Planet titled The Guardians of the Owl Kingdom. This was meant as an adaptation of the fantasy story he had begun writing with Wallflower. In the level's description, Christian referred to his co-writer by her online name, Damien Antaria. The trolls were quickly able to use this information to track down the Wallflower's true identity, and decided to email her a link to the quickie. To put it mildly, she was horrified that her private information had been discovered, and was even more disturbed by the things she read on the site. She emailed Chris furious about the entire situation, demanding he find some way to remove all the info about her from the internet. Chris tried to explain, blaming the trolls for all his problems, and concluded his email by saying he loved her, which seemed to be the last straw.
I don't love you and I hate you for this. Everything was fine until I met you. I don't know why I took up Mom's offer to go to the social club. I had enough friends here at home and on the internet.
As Chris was reeling from yet another loss of a gal pal, he received an email from a troll calling himself Surfshack Tito, claiming to be the one who sent the Wallflower the link to the quickie. He differentiated himself from the other trolls